And we lead with this. Vusimuzi Cat Matlala appeared before the Ad Hoc Committee at Kgosi Mampuru Correctional Centre this week. Initially, he indicated that he was unwell and not ready to give evidence and that he was underprepared. But over the 2 days, he eventually testified on serious allegations of corruption and political interference within the police. Matlala is currently in custody facing charges that include conspiracy to commit murder, fraud and money laundering. His testimony included claims of cash payments to senior officials, interventions in law enforcement operations, and disputed digital communications. The political killings task team was disbanded under circumstances still under scrutiny. To help us understand the implications of what was revealed, we're joined by crime expert Chad Tomas. Let's take a listen, however, at this.
And your response was, I can't give you 1 million, but I can give you 300,000.
No, I didn't give him 300,000. I gave him 3, and then again I gave him 2, like I mentioned. And the day I decided to stop, I was supposed to give him 300,000 again. But that never happened. It's when I decided to stop taking his calls.
The Tembisa Hospital matter. Why is your name mentioned in connection with that tender?
I would love to know as well. We are very, very, very close friends. We've done a lot of things together, traveled together, me and his wife and my wife, and there was nothing that I will do to harm your son. Actually, your son was like a young brother to me. So there are people who are getting between us, trying to convince you that I took your son so that you might think of me as this boogeyman that people paint me to be.
Why did you proceed to launch a High Court application regarding all the firearms?
I was not the owner.
Yes.
Of what?
Of the firearms, of all the firearms. Over 25 firearms.
Even now, I still have the licensed firearms of my firearms, and I even have the copies of the licensed firearms. They are registered under my name, under my company. So when you say they're not under my name, I do not understand. Or we can do this, if it's possible, I don't know, that I can arrange that tomorrow, I don't know where, then they can bring the licenses to check when were they issued and who did they belong to. They are mine.
In my view, Mr. Matlala, you're not a businessman. You're a crook.
I am.
You're a thief, you're a fraud, and you're corrupt. And the problem in this country today is that people like yourself clothe yourself in the respectability of calling yourself a businessman when you are nothing but a dishonest thug.
Let's unpack this now with Chad Tomas. Chad, good afternoon. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Did you find anything useful to come out of Cat Matlala's testimony this week?
Thank you so much for asking me to join you this afternoon, and good afternoon to all the viewers. Look, it's a very strange situation we find ourselves in when one listens to the likes of Vusimuzi Cat Matlala or Brown Mokgotsi. There will always be a 1% of truth. They'll drop in a truth bomb here and there, but for the most, they are evasive. For the most, they don't concede, and for the most, they won't admit to the majority of what's put to them. And this leaves us as the public in a very precarious position, because what parts of the testimony do we believe and pursue, and what parts of the testimony do we outright dismiss as being rumor, conjecture, or outright lies? And in respect to Vusimuzi Cat Matlala, he makes some startling allegations, but then when questions are put to him, he denies certain aspects categorically. So it's difficult, and I feel for our ad hoc committee, because they are trying as best they can to get lucid answers from somebody who's clearly evasive and is more concerned with himself than the complete and utter destruction that he and his cronies have created through the manipulation of tenders, thefts of monies, and organized crime.
Let's talk a bit about some of the prevaricating that we saw that you making reference to there. Cat Matlala, tells us that he had given money to former Police Minister Bheki, but it seems to have been after the fact of Bheki having been minister, not during the time of him being a minister. Bheki had also stayed at his penthouse in Pretoria, and they seemingly had what was a budding relationship. The amount here is 2 payments amounting to 500,000 rand. He was asked whether or not he believes that was corruption, and he said no, and then later on he sort of tacitly conceded that it was indeed corruption. He earlier had said that at best it's unethical behavior but not unlawful behavior. And then on day 2 he was like, well, that may, and I can understand why that would be seen as corruption. Some of those tacit types of concessions, do you think, and there are a few of them that we could comb through, but do you think it helps build a case for how corruption operates in the state and police apparatus?
It does, and it's not the first time we've seen something like this. We saw a similar situation where Jackie Selebe was receiving favors and amounts of money from Glenn Agliotti. We saw with Shabir Sheikh and Jacob Zuma in respect of the Thales arms deal debacle with the so-called encrypted fax, 500,000 Rand purportedly passing hands, and that was involving, again, assistance with bonds, assisting with school fees, assisting with car washes, buying of shoes, that type of thing. So you see money passing hands. It's almost become acceptable in South Africa that somebody can do a favor for you. And despite the fact that Becky Cele went to great lengths during his testimony at the ad hoc to say, look, I'm a private citizen. If somebody offers me a freebie, I'm going to take it up. He didn't go to the full extent of saying what those freebies were. So if the freebies were trips to Lanseria, or trips from Lanseria to some other wedding with a team of bodyguards and vehicles supplied by Vusimuzi Cat Matlala, can that be perceived as a gratuity? Staying in his penthouse, is that a gratuity? Receiving 500,000 Rand, is that a gratuity? Well, it becomes a gratuity in terms of what we define as PRECA, the Prevention Committee of Corrupt Activities Act, if you're expecting something for that and if you do something for that. And we all know that Becky Cele is still very connected to certain parts of the police. We know the police are factionalized, and there's a faction that's still very loyal to him. And we do hear how the weapons were returned and that the PKTT did stop, in Vusimuzi Cat Matlala's words, to harass him, although they later did arrest him. But at that stage, when he was engaging with Becky Cele, they did. And then it seems as if he wants to ignore Becky Cele. And I think this is because he was trying to get Becky Cele to now influence the contract, the wellness tender of 360 million, to be reinstated, and Becky Cele wasn't able to achieve that. So he gave him half, and he received a gratuity. He wouldn't give him the other half because he didn't believe that he would be successful in helping him regain that contract.
And this is an interesting, it's quite clear what the unethical behavior is here, but at the time, Becky Cele wasn't yielding any sort of state power in any official capacity. He certainly still had influence, or at least purported to still have influence, as we've seen. And Cat Matlala was under the impression he was paying Becky Cele for what Cele had described as facilitation fees, right? Basically paying him for a service. That seems like ordinary quid pro quo, but not necessarily by the letter of the law corrupt. In what ways should the committee deal with that piece of evidence to determine what the transgression is there?
Well, that's why PREC is so very important. PREC was introduced for that very reason, to show when a gratuity is actually a corrupt act, whether the gratuity is to facilitate something and whether it's done in an unlawful manner. If you have somebody who's no longer in office but still holds influence and is able to influence people from doing something that is contrary to what their mandated function is, well, that in itself is a corrupt act. And I think that's why the former minister may have gone to great lengths to try make out that, look, I'm a private citizen, I'm entitled to take what I want from who I want, I'm no longer in office. But the unfortunate part is the Act doesn't distinguish whether or not you're in office. It does have a section that you can report whether people are in a corrupt relationship that do hold office, but there's a broader section of the Act where you can make a generalized report where a corrupt act may take place. So we don't know how we would convince people not to continue taking action against Cat, or to allow Cat to get his weapons back. Did he pay somebody else, or did he just use his influence? But either which way, it's fundamentally opposed to the way things should work. You shouldn't have somebody being able to influence the outcome of an investigation.
Yeah. There was seemingly a latent undertone of whether or not Cat Matlala is a legitimate businessman and whether his business practices seem to be legitimate. However, the focus was primarily on his security business on the one hand, and Medicare 24, which is the wellness business that was in contract with the South African Police Service. And it is those two businesses that came under scrutiny. Did we learn anything sufficient about those businesses and business practices that can help build a case of state looting, impropriety, corruption in ways that meets the letter of the law, particularly around the security tenders he's been getting from the Department of Education and various other tenders and various other departments and state functionaries. And of course, Ekurhuleni Metro Police Department comes into play over there. And on the other hand, that 360 million rand contract.
There's a couple of things that stand out for me. The doyen of security in South Africa is a gentleman by the name of Val Bartman. He employs in excess of 65,000 people, and he is the biggest security services provider in South Africa. He doesn't ride around in a convoy with 14 bodyguards who are ex-task force members and special force operators. Cat Matlala claims that he spends 2 million rand a month on his personal protection, but that he uses it for marketing for his security company, yet none of those vehicles are marked. I asked the public who are listening today, where have they seen a major site protected by Cat Protection Services or heard of anything to do with Cat VIP? You don't see it. So what is the actual use of him having a militia around him? And this is a point of contention we've seen coming out in recent years, where you've got taxi bosses and other rogue businessmen buying up security companies to have access to legal weapons, access to well-trained individuals. And those individuals are not there to provide a security service. They're there to settle scores. They're there to act as a militia. They're there to collect. They're there to extort. So Cat Matlala's version that he's using 14 bodyguards, ex-task force members, ex-special force members to market his business and protect him holds zero water whatsoever. He was using them as a personal militia, and most probably other businessmen were hiring him to settle scores because they didn't want to go the traditional long-winded way of going through courts. They rather try to settle a dispute through extortion, intimidation, and in extreme cases through bullets.
Yeah, Chad, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. Chad Tomas, who is a crime analyst. Very interesting testimony that came up there. Of course, the Ad Hoc Committee had officially concluded that testimony at Kgosi Mampuru this week and are awaiting permission from Parliament to continue with their work as their term has, or at least the term of the Ad Hoc Committee has now officially lapsed.